but that's good to know.
Good morning and welcome. I won't be using a microphone just yet. I hope everyone can hear me, but we're so glad that you are here this morning as we begin our Sabbath celebration. 122 years of being a church. It's 120. Okay. Yeah, making up numbers in my mind. Inflating, huh? Inflating. I'm a planner. No, but so glad that you could join us today. I'm especially excited about today's lecture. We are honored to have an historian extraordinaire in our midst who's kindly agreed to kind of share a little bit about the history of our church. Things that some of you may know, but things that also I hear that is really good at finding things that most people don't find. And so we're looking forward to hearing more from Michael Schofield. Thank you so much, Michael, for agreeing to do this. Yeah, just to let you know, if at any time you want to drink just across in the courtyard there's some little refreshments, some cakes and some coffee and hot drinks if you're interested. But for now, we'll begin our lecture. I'm going to give the thumbs up to you guys here. But thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to having a great day of celebration.
And in conclusion, well, I'm going to talk about the church, but also the church in the context of Adventism in Glendale. And so I have to start at the beginning of the Advent movement, which was primarily in the state of Maine. James White there in the Portland, Maine area published a little journal, and then they moved to Rochester, New York, where my ancestors got involved. And then the Adventism kind of centered in the Midwest in Battle Creek. And finally, in 1868, an Adventist came to California. The first Adventist that came to California was Merritt Kellogg. And there was no rail to get there. He used an ox cart. The next Adventists to come to California was J.N. Loughborough and Bordeaux, and they had to take a ship to the Panama Canal, take a train across the isthmus, and then a different ship up to San Francisco, arriving in 1868. So there were no Adventists listed in Glendale in 1904. The centroid of Adventism in California was in Northern California because that's where the people were. Eventually, you have primary Adventist communities in Loma Linda and Glendale, La Sierra. There was a small community around the White Memorial Hospital. And a lot of the physicians in the White Memorial who were affiliated with the College of Medical Evangelists lived either in Glendale or in the San Gabriel Valley. So they were part of the support of Glendale City Church. That's the city limits of Glendale. I don't know why I threw that in there. But in 1904, this is what Glendale looked like. It was rural. And if we're looking south, that's Griffith Park on the right and Brand Boulevard. It was just a bunch of, now I don't know if they had a water supply or if they had plumbing, but it was rural. And this is where John Burden purchased this old Glendale hotel. For a while it was a school for girls. This is what it looked like. This is a colorized photo. I don't like that technique, but anyway. So finally in the 1907 SDA yearbook, we do have a Glendale sanitarium. And that's where this church started, was in the parlor of the Glendale Sanitarium. And John Burden was still involved in this. John Burden was Ellen White's go-to person for starting institutions, including the Paradise Valley San and buying the facility for the Loma Linda San and eventually the College of Medical Evangelists. So the building was a former hotel, then a girls' school, then for a while it was Glendale High School, and finally a sanitarium, and it was raised in 1924. Abby Whittaker Simpson was the medical director, a woman. Yeah. But the issue is that Glendale's population was much smaller than Pasadena. Pasadena was the place to be, not Glendale. And so this is what it looked like from the street. And again, there was a trolley line running up and down Brand Boulevard. That's why it's so wide. And finally, in 1919, there were a few Adventist churches around Southern California. That multiplied by 1924. Some of those churches don't exist anymore, or they evolved. But anyway, here is the sanitarium. And finally, the congregation here got a facility of their own. It was first on Wilson and Isabel, and now on Isabel and California. And the whole church was burned down on the morning of January 23, 1930. Apparently they had phones because someone got on the phone and called the Methodists, and the Methodists allowed us to use their church that morning. And the office building, which was separate, survived, and So the small children's divisions were held in the office building and other divisions up at Theodore Roosevelt High School. I'm not sure if that even exists today. Yeah. So this is what the church looked like in 1932. Cost of $69,000. This is an old photo. Notice the cars and the private homes in the background there. And they had a dedicatory service 2 years later. So they built this in 2 years in the start of the Depression. And one of the featured speakers at the dedicatory celebration was Alonzo Baker. Now, he was associate editor of Signs of the Times up at Pacific Press, but he came down for that. I see A.G. Daniels was there. A.G. Daniels was president of the General Conference, and he retired and moved to Glendale, and he'll figure into the story a little bit later. The Depression was hard on the church. Southern California tithe actually took a dip, even though the membership was growing at a steady pace. So the construction of the Glendale City Church occurred right at the start of the Depression, and they still were able to pull it off and pay for it all. What kicked tithe back up in 1940 was defense spending. And if you want to know who was president, I'd throw that in for you. So the Depression, the tithe coming in during the Depression was so severe that conferences had to cut the pay for their ministers. Today we would never do that, but they were imperial back then. Anyway, so here is a note of in the Central California Conference, a further wage cut was voted for the ministers. So part of what kicked the economy back up in 1940 was defense spending, and you had Lockheed Aircraft right down the road building airplanes. So the Glendale Sanitarium moved up onto the hill, and this is their building up there after 1924. That's the way Chevy Chase goes, and Glen Oaks, just to give you some orientation. And that building there is the Glendale Academy. So now they financed the Glendale Sanitarium with bonds, and I just found this little item in the Pacific Union Recorder about calling in the bonds and paying them off. They also advertised for birds. They wanted birds to about 15 or 20 canaries or small birds for the benefit of the patients. This was before infectious disease control. And that they would pay transportation of the bird if the bird survived. One of the physicians there at the San was Belle Jessie Wood Comstock. Now, her granddaughter was my lab partner at La Sierra. She studied at Battle Creek, and for 7 years, she was the head female physician at the sanitarium. And she's buried in Forest Lawn. Forest Lawn figures into our story quite a bit if we have time. They added some buildings. This is a colorized photo of the parking lot there at the west end of the sanitarium. And in the 1940 Youth Instructor, they featured what it was like to be a student nurse. All the sanitariums had to have their own nursing programs or to get their own supply of nurses because they marry off or something like that. So this was the articles in the Youth Instructor, and they had a kind of an aerial photo of the sanitarium there in the distance. They did it again in 1948 in the Youth Instructor. These are obviously posed photographs. I would go bonkers if a nurse was at the piano in the parlor. But and then they added this wing, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was around 1965 or 64 or something like that. And eventually, this was the main entrance for many years of the old Sanitarium Church, which was a secondary church to Glendale City, our younger cousin, I guess. There's the nurses' dorm, the rehab wing, the Vallejo Drive Church, and, of course, the 134 freeway just wiped out the whole front yard of the sanitarium, but we had no control over that. The Glendale Sanitarium was a place to come if you needed surgery. Here's a Asiatic Division journal that talks about a lady, a missionary, American missionary in the Asia Division, coming to the Glendale Sanitarium to get surgery. They didn't go to Loma Linda; they came to Glendale. So now I got to talk about Clarence Kimlin. He attended Battle Creek College. He moved to Glendale in 1913. He became the business manager of the San. He was on the Glendale City Council, and he was mayor of Glendale for several years. And he was president of the Hospital Association of Southern California and the director of the Glendale Chamber of Commerce. And they had his funeral in this church, right over here on this platform. There was an honor guard of police officers around the casket. There were 100 honorary pallbearers, and he was buried at Forest Lawn. You're talking ahead of my slides. Please. So Kimlin Drive, which is what goes up to the Academy, is named after him. So actually, it was named after him before he died, which is interesting. So the Adventist Hospital now is the second largest employer in Glendale. Well, I went through a list of all the church pastors. Some of them I can't find any information about. Some of them I can find their grave markers, but we'll go through a few of them. George Reeser, of course, was the conference president and the first pastor of this church in 1906. There was a physician who came from London to be a physician at the San, and he also served as a pastor of this church. If we fast forward, I found the grave marker for Elmer Neff, was pastor in 1922. Martin Hollister. Notice all these pastors are before the Depression. There was a lot of turnover then. Martin Hollister in 1930. Jesse Stevens. Took a lot of digging to find their photographs. Alger Johns was a famous Adventist minister, also very prominent in religious liberty issues. Andrew Fearing was here after the war. He was also chair of the Academy Board, and I'll talk about the Academy in a second. Francis Bush was here just before Arthur Beets came. The Chapel of the Good Shepherd was dedicated in 1960, and this church was the place to have any event in Southern California Conference. So they had the nursing graduation. This one's in 1960. I noticed that Will Alexander was the speaker for that. And then we had Arthur Beets here, who came up from the White Memorial Church when I was a kid. And he was born in the Midwest. He was licensed as a minister in Minnesota. He pastored at Berkeley and then the White Memorial. He was chair of the Department of Religion for CME, and he was all over the map. So he was writing a great deal for the Review and Herald and for Signs of the Times, and even had several books published. And he was a popular speaker here. He's going to the Columbia Union Conference to speak to a time there. And I found his draft registration card. Before World War II, all ministers, as well as all other men, had to register for the draft. So we can find out some interesting things about where he lived in Alameda, California. And he was born in North Dakota, and he worked for the Northern California Conference. Here he is at one of the anniversary events preaching. I don't know the date on this, but that's Bobby Herr, who was our choir director for a long time, and that's Marion Osborne, the wife of one of the former pastors here. And I remember her from La Sierra. After Beets, Leslie Harding came here. Born in Calcutta, he's had a number of, educational careers. Taught religion at PUC. He was president of the seminary in the Philippines and things like that. After Jerry Sorensen, Rudy Torres, Arthur R. Torres, was pastor here for 10 years and very influential for me personally. After Rudy, we had Mitch Henson, and he shepherded the church for quite a while. Now, this church, besides being the center of a lot of Southern California conference activities, was also a center of the musical programs. And so it had, they did the Messiah every year forever. Gladys Rue was the conductor. And they would combine choirs from a number of churches, and they performed on this platform. So this was a map of Glendale back in, this is in 1928. The sand was there. We were way over here in the downtown area. The Academy, the Voice of Prophecy came in 1952. The Vallejo Drive Church, the Pacific Union Conference was in an office up on Verdugo Road, and the Southern California Conference office moved here, and there was also the Eagle Rock Church. So that little symbol with the cross inverted is where our church was on this topographical map. Notice that there is a trolley line going up Glendale Boulevard, long time ago. Three shopping centers have come and gone on the rest of the block. One thanks to the Northridge earthquake. It gone. So another institution that influenced this church was the Voice of Prophecy. HMS Richards and the quartet. And this is the building they put on the corner of Merrill and Chevy Chase. This was quite a large bureaucracy by the time they moved there, with all the script writers and the ladies grading papers, the correspondence to school. They went through several announcers. One of them was Harold Murray Blunden. He was born in Australia. He was an Adventist minister. He was an occasional VOP announcer. He died in St. Helena. Everybody goes to St. Helena to die, unless they die in Loma Linda, and there's a lot of that going on. And he is the grandfather of Joan London, whom you may recognize on ABC's Good Morning America. Well, the Voice of Prophecy moved out to the Media Center there in Thousand Oaks in 1979, and the GC wanted to bring all the broadcasts onto a single campus and centralize. The goal was to save money and reduce cost, but the result was it actually increased part of the overhead for the Voice of Prophecy. This violates Parkinson's law because truly effective institutions and movements precede any building or edifice built to house them. That's true about the Pentagon. Well, this is the original conference office there on Pasadena Avenue, and the church, the denomination still owns it, but they moved the conference office up to Chevy Chase, and that's where it is today, along with a Book and Bible House. That's old language for Adventist Book Center. I can speak both. And Forest Lawn, if we have time, will figure into our story. So that's the conference office. I remember the conference president once offered me a job, and I turned it down, and I'm glad I did. What many people don't know about is the conference bought an old theater on Eagle Rock Boulevard and called it the Lyceum. I don't think any of you are old enough to remember this. They used it for, one person. Okay, they used it for evangelistic meetings, but on Saturday nights they showed Disney movies to the Adventist market. So it was a cinema. Okay, this is what it looks like today. It was taken over by Bob Baker Marionette Theater, and so you'll always see a lot of school buses parked in front of it. Let's see, the 25th anniversary service of Glendale City Church, any major event, it would be held here. So in this photo, this is a home missionary meeting, but that's Brad Braley at the organ. Again, the interaction of the Voice of Prophecy and this church. we used to fill the fellowship hall with youth. Of course, there were some times when the youth were so numerous from all over the area, and they were kind of hard to control at times. Lots of Vesper programs here, of vocal groups from Pacific Union College. We had a Bible worker for a while named Mary Walsh, and I remember her. This was 1979 or so, and she had published in 1946 a book about Catholicism. I don't think we would circulate this book today, but it's part of our heritage. In the 1971 Pacific Union Recorder, we have an announcement of a musical group that's all in one family, and some of these photos I could blackmail people for, but this was what they looked like. This is not the best rendition. And when they had a Sabbath school rally, they filled the rafters of this church. That's what it looks like full. If the Southern California Conference had a ministers' chorus, and where do they pose for their group photo? On the steps of the Glendale City Church. A new youth pastor came to need I say any more? Okay. R.R. Beats was not a pastor here, but he was around a lot. He had an interesting career. He knew my grandfather back in the Southern New England Conference, and he eventually became a vice president of the General Conference, and he was the board chair of Loma Linda University when I was there. Two Academy graduates are R.R. Beats' son, Gordon Beats, who most recently, until he retired, was president of, I'm going to say Southern Missionary College, because I tend to revert to older names of institutions. And also another rising star from this congregation was John Brunt, who was eventually dean of the School of Theology at Walla Walla University. Got some photos of the associate pastors. Standing there in the back was B. Michael Blaine. Some of you may remember him. The church had a softball team for a while, and they're posing with all their trophies. Again, the group photo in the front steps, I don't know what year this is, but they're much better in the fellowship hall. They're much better annotated. This was a kind of a curious gathering, and I can kind of guess where it is, but that was Colette Witt and Ann Hoxie. She was involved in the refurbishment of the chapel. Robert Marsh, of course, and Mitch Henson. Ginger Dale, Barbara Jones, who was one of the pillars of the church for a long time. Dorothy Colvin, and let's see, who else? Meredith Torres, Harold Fonsolo, Carol Job. And so here's one, probably 1966, when I photographed this. And we see a lot of people we recognize, including Arthur Beats and Marshes and Rudy Torres and Warren and Ginger Dale and the Hoxies. There's Dorothy Colvin, Meredith Job. And up there in the crowd is Bob Berman. You can spot him by his beard, okay? And Dorothy Colvin, she was such an influence in my life. She was a pillar of this church after she came here from Burbank. Her son was a friend of mine, George Colvin, who eventually got his doctorate at Claremont and went into the U.S. Foreign Service in the State Department. And he was attached to embassies in Paris, Sudan, Eritrea, Uganda, and eventually he was chargé d'affaires in the American embassy in Samoa. So then I got to talk about Colette Witt, who I was greeting out here 10 years ago. She is the daughter of W.R. Beach, who was General Secretary of the General Conference for many years. She married Charles Witt, a physician from University of Tennessee, but they had two children, one of which was Alex Witt, who is the weekend anchor on MSNBC. Okay? And they are both buried at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. Here's another shot of the pastoral staff. There's Linda Gage in the front row left. That was our first female pastor. And I got to talk about Harold Fonslow, and actually the Fonslow family, because he was born in Honduras. His parents were from Germany. They were missionaries in Central America. His father died in Guatemala City, and his mother took over the conference office or mission office. They came to America in 1946, Harold and his two brothers. He graduated from La Sierra in 52. From 56, he got his MD degree. And for most of his career, he was a pathologist up here at Glendale Medical Center. And he died just this past year. Now, the Central American area included Guatemala and Honduras. And here we have Mrs. Marie Fonslow, Secretary-Treasurer of the Guatemala Mission. This before she came to America. Now, I found their petition for naturalization. Here is Harold's petition. This is what he looked like. He'd hate me if I showed this photo. Back in when he, this is a visa application for travel to Brazil. And eventually Marie and the three boys came to America. And so here is her petition for naturalization. And when you petition to become a U.S. citizen, part of the one place on the form says, what ship brought you to America? Well, they flew in, and so they gave the registration number of a Pan American DC-4. Now, this particular Pan American flight that took them from Guatemala to New Orleans, 2 months later, it crashed at the New Orleans airport. All 46 people on board survived. So there, okay, she had two sons who graduated from Glendale Academy in 1950, and I have so many memories of Harold. But one day back in the 70s, he invited me up to his lab in the hospital, and he used what he calls a conference microscope to look at tissue. And he would talk about each tissue, not just about the tissue. He would talk about the person that this tissue was taken from. He would know their names. This is a level of caring that I just found astonishing. So that's Harold, which brings me to Glendale Academy. If you want to pose a bunch of students, you did on the front steps of the Glendale City Church. Glendale Academy, I don't know about Max Hill, but Dan Oakes was the second principal of Glendale Academy. And here is the yearbook for Glendale Academy. I forget what year this was. Oh, this was probably 1920 or something like that, 22. So here's some of the principals of Glendale Academy. And I'm going to talk about Lee Marsh. He was principal here for 8 years. And, Alfred Simonson lived to be 102. So more recently, Nat Parker, Chuck Watkins, Ed Boyott, that's what he looks like with hair, and Mike Connor. And Chuck Watkins ran the school for 20 years, whereas nowadays you burn out pretty fast. We've gone through a lot of principals up there. So Lee Marsh, got to talk about him. I found him in the census for 1940. Lee Russell Marsh, he was born in Minneapolis, attended Union College, eventually got an MA from USC. After he left the academy, he taught up at Glendale City College, and then down, he was insurance with Prudential Insurance, and died in 1961. Again, I have his draft registration, so I know where he lived in 1940, up on Corwin. He was a popular speaker. Here is an announcement where he went out to La Sierra to speak to the father-son banquet. And he is buried in Forest Lawn. But his greatest achievement was fathering Robert Marsh. And I think most of you remember Robert and Marguerite Marsh. And they were a couple to be reckoned with. This is Marguerite. She was born in Shanghai. So this is Marguerite, I would say maybe 3 to 4 years old, in the passport photo there in Shanghai. In the class of 1937, Robert Marsh was the only man wearing a suit. Okay. Here is the academy level students at Glendale Academy in 1924. This is a pretty sizable enrollment for a city that has so few population. And then this is the elementary part of the academy, the students and faculty there in 1924. If we look closely, there's one boy in coveralls, like farmers wear, and of course the window is open because they didn't have any air conditioning. This is the graduating seniors of 1925. The girls all wore uniforms. And that actually matches the uniforms that they wore at La Sierra Academy. They had youth rallies in the gymnasium up there at the academy. And one of the graduates, the senior president in 1948, was HMS Richards, Jr. Also in 1948 was Harold Fonsolo, graduated. Andrew Fearing, pastor of this church, was chairman of the board, managing board of Glendale Academy. There's Nat Parker. Andrew Fearing, I won't spend a lot of time talking about him. But again, when the academy had a graduation event, they held it in this church. That's the lobby before we got carpet. This is what it looks like with carpet and more wood paneling. And so the juniors stood on either side of the aisle in kind of an honor guard or something for the graduates that would come and sit up here in the choir loft. Boys in black, girls in white, I'm not sure why. And so this is probably a baccalaureate event, not a diploma event. And here they are out on the out on the sidewalk after the event. Notice the white walls on the cars parked across the street. So Glendale Academy and the church have had a rich relationship. Brenda Moore was taught choir at the academy, and she was choir director here for a while. Here she is, and there's Terry Bork up there on the platform, back when his hair was a different color. Another pastor that was influential here was Smuts Van Rooyen. And he was only here for 3 years, but a great influence. I've been visiting him on maybe twice a week. He lives in Linda Valley Villa out there at Loma Linda, and delight to talk to. And he just went up Thanksgiving to San Luis Obispo. Yeah, that's Linda Valley Villa. It's better than prison. And here is Smuts and his family. 3 children and a gaggle of grandchildren. Tasha is an RN counselor up in San Luis Obispo. Andre is a psychologist here they live in Pasadena. Craig is a Superior Court judge in San Luis Obispo. And Mimi, Craig's wife, is a trauma surgeon, again, up in the Central Coast. And here is Craig being sworn in as a Superior Court judge. Which brings me to Forest Lawn, because everybody's here. This was the main gate back in 1912. First, I'll talk about Arthur Daniels, president of the General Conference. active in this church after he retired. Another one is James McElhaney, also president of the General Conference and active in this church. Again, Brazil has published all the visas, so this is what McElhaney looks like. And the memorial service for McElhaney was held here in this church. And on June 29, 1959, and one of the officiants was R.R. Beats. Who else was there? Glenn Calkins was Union Conference president at the time. So there's so many others. A pressman from the Pacific Union, Pacific Press. Sabbath School secretary, George Cavanis, educator. Belle Comstock, I talked about her before. Her granddaughter was my lab partner in chemistry. Delos Comstock, her husband. Marie Fonsolo. I remember when she was sitting down there in the youth room when we had the 8:30 Sabbath school class down there. She spoke with a thick German accent. I do remember that. Frederick Griggs, after whom Griggs Hall in Loma Linda is named. Of course, I've talked about Clarence Kimlin, Lee Marsh, Ithiel Gillis. I didn't know this man until I met him on a Delta flight from LAX to Atlanta. He was born in Oakland, but he grew up in China of missionary parents. He himself was a missionary in Korea and the Dutch East Indies and came back to be manager of the Voice of Prophecy. And he was the chair of the building committee that built this chapel across the way. So, and chair of the Glendale Academy Board. See how everything's connected? And he's buried up there in Forest Lawn. A lot of other people. Francis Wilcox, editor of the Review and Herald. Herbert Dawson was a deacon. I remember talking to him in that room. And Mildred Dawson used to play the organ here. And of course, George Rue and Gladys Rue, our choir director forever. Dorothy Colvin, Otto and Annabelle Neufeld. Yeah, Francis Wilcox. This is, he was editor of the Review and Herald until 1961. Who else? Oh, my goodness. William Dart was Academy principal down at Linwood. Anyway, so many people. So that's the history of Glendale Church and the environment around Glendale. And I'll take questions. Having mercy on you, I took out 100 slides on Wednesday. Yes? Right. Well, both names apply. Um, it's the Glendale Adventist Church that's in the city rather than in the rural hill, which became the sanitarium. But you say Glendale City Church and everybody knows what you mean. Other questions? Yes. Right. I'm sure he did a lot of weddings. Yes, he officiated at her parents' wedding. Questions?
Will you make this available where do you have it like in a format where you can email it to us or on YouTube or online? Because it's really good what you did, and then when you box stuff in and label it, like you did a really good job.
I've been doing PowerPoint for 25 years. I teach it. I normally don't share the slides because the slides are designed to support the oral narrative.
Yeah.
But sometimes I put together a storyboard that has the slides with a narrative around them.
What about if you were to write in clouds and in boxes some of the narrative?
How much are you willing to pay?
Public information, it's all free.
Yeah, he dug it out.
I-
There it's free, but you have to pay it.
Everything.
yeah.
All the periodicals.
Marge. You had a question.
Yeah, the picture you had of HMS Richards class president and Harry Thompson.
Yeah.
Do you have the whole yearbook? Or
Okay. Yeah, the yearbooks I found.
my dad was in that class.
Oh, really?
I talked to Harry Thompson once years ago
Yeah.
when I first started coming here.
The yearbooks I found. Yeah.
They were the three heralds.
Oh, the Three Heralds. I won't go with that.
I know. I don't know what kind of jokes.
The yearbooks I found in the basement archives at La Sierra University Library. They have a very rich archives set. Some of the photos I've found, most of the photos I found online. Remember, the General Conference Archives website has all the journals and the Pacific Union Recorder up till 1978 or something like that. But they're all available online, all the gleaners and everything like that. Some of the photos do not reproduce well, but all that's online. Then I've been using Ancestry.com document database, which is free in the Redlands Public Library. And that's where I found the passport applications and the naturalization papers and all those Brazilian visas. Some wonderful. Yes, Sandy. Which is why you're careful what you say about anybody. I particularly learned that in Loma Linda. The most recent announcement at Loma Linda was the appointment of Paul Herman to be provost at Loma Linda University, and he is the grandson of W.G.C. Murdoch, who was dean of the seminary. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, thank you for coming, and you have a little time before we assemble for the church service.